The real fire is not in the flame that dances on the candle wick. Observe the moths and where they gather, for there the true beacon blazes. And do not wax on in pride, or like the candle soon you will melt from the angry fire. Even the diamond melts away if near this flame it, too, should stray. Hafiz, renowned Persian poet. The new Sassanian dynasty had forged via the sword a presence for itself in the province of Persis. Here they would carve the foundation of the empire they were to build. This would create friction with the ruling Parthians and culminate in 3 battles between the two sides. The third and decisive battle would see Ardashir defeat the Parthian leader Artabanus IV. Ardashir had been accompanied by his son Shapur and would co-reign with him over their new empire for the last 2 years of his life. With regards to Shapur, it was said Ardashir judged him the gentlest, wisest, bravest, and ablest of all his children. Iranian historian Mohammed al-Tabari had said that the Iranians had already formed positive opinions of Shapur before his ascension on account of his intelligence, understanding, and learning, as well as his boldness, oratory, logic, affection for the subject of his people, and his kind-heartedness. Upon Ardashir's death in 242 or 243, Shapur would become sole Shan Shah, or King of Kings, of the new Sasanian Empire. His father had begun a process of rebuilding across various regions of the empire. Of note, the rebuilt ancient city of Zrang in Sakistan. Ctesiphon would for some time remain the capital, with most of the Sassanian Shahs being crowned there. It was situated on a naturally favorable site for trade, with the Tigris and Euphrates both approaching each other there. Not only did trade from every direction converge here, but much of the agricultural wealth of the Sasanian Empire was concentrated here and nearby. Shapur himself would build Bishapur in Pars province and live much of his life there. However, it was difficult for other cities to compete with Ctesiphon for the economic and strategic reasons mentioned above. However, these various strengths also made it a prime target, and one that wasn't difficult for enemies to reach coming down the rivers from the northwest. With regards to enemies, the Romans would continue as under the Parthians to be a mutual foil for the Sassanians. Indeed, conflict with Rome would be woven into the fabric that was Shapur's initial years of rule. Both the rock inscriptions and Roman accounts seem to confirm 3 Roman campaigns, but differing accounts on how they played out. Let us start with the Roman account, which in the biography of Emperor Gordian states he set out against the Persians with a huge army and great quantity of gold, and wintered in Antioch. There he fought and won repeated battles, and drove out Shapur from Antioch, Carrhae, and Nisibis, before routing him at Rishaena and forcing him to restore all occupied cities unharmed to their citizens. Gordian wrote the Senate that we have penetrated as far as Nisibis and shall even go to Ctesiphon. However, Philip the Arab, prefect of the guard, would hatch plots and convince the soldiers to proclaim him joint emperor, thereby undermining the authority of Gordian. He would force a retreat, and it is said that Gordianus would die during this retreat. Although Zosimus's account of Gordianus being killed deep in the enemy's land would match the Persian account. One account even has him being thrown from his horse during battle and breaking his thigh and then dying of the wound. Elements of their account match Shapur's own account, for he had inscribed that, just as we were established on the throne, the emperor Gordianus gathered in all of the Roman Empire an army of Germanic tribesmen, and marched upon Assyria against Iran Shar and us. On the edges of Assyria at Misiki, there was a great frontal battle, wherein Gordianus Caesar perished, and we destroyed the army. The Romans then proclaimed Philip emperor, and he came to us for terms, and paid us 500,000 dinars as ransom for his life and became tributary to us. Perhaps the truth between the two versions leans towards Shapur's account when we consider that the Roman account fails to explain why, after having supposedly routed Shapur near Nisibis and marched to the gates of Ctesiphon, they would then purchase a shameful peace. It could be that the Romans transferred the loss of an emperor to the battlefield upon Philip. Philip would himself proclaim victory over the Persians, but only once he was safely out of their reach. We know that the rock reliefs show a prostrate Gordianus under Shapur's horse, while Shapur is receiving Philip. We also know that Armenia, which had the preceding years been a Roman protectorate, would again fall under Persian rule. In the years between 250 and 256, we have little from Roman sources. However, Shapur states that the Caesar lied and did harm to Armenia. This was likely in reference to failure to pay the required tribute of the prior arrangement, and thus in 250, Shapur would invade Mesopotamia, but political trouble in Khorasan diverted him. After dealing with the issue, he resumed his invasion of Roman territory along his border. The inscriptions further state, "And we annihilated a Roman force of 60,000 at Barbalissus, and we burned and ravaged the province of Syria and all its dependencies. And in that one campaign, we conquered from the Roman Empire the following 36 forts and cities," which he goes on to list in his inscription. Next, Shapur would, through either incitement or a pact, have Anak the Parthian murder the king of Armenia, Khosrow II. While Anak would be successful in his task in 252, he would himself be murdered by the Armenian nobles. Shapur would then appoint one of his sons, Hormizd I, as the great king of Armenia. Next, Georgia would submit to the Sassanian Empire. As a result of these two actions, the northern borders of the empire would be secure, with these kingdoms acting as buffer states. In the year 256, Shapur would capture Antioch and then lay siege to Dura-Europos. The Roman garrison in the city was disciplined and had no intention of surrendering to Shapur's forces. Evidence shows us that the garrison was a mix of several different legions. We don't have exact numbers, but based on the presence listed above, we can surmise that the city was defended by at least a low number of thousands of Roman legionaries. Shapur, meanwhile, had the city surrounded by an estimated 23,000 of his finest troops. What's interesting about this siege is the use of chemical weapons by the Sassanians and the digging of tunnels by both sides. This is a tactic seen in other classical era sieges, but used to full effect by the Sassanians and the Romans. For in the ruins of the city, which was abandoned shortly after this siege, we can see the evidence left behind of the very tunnels that Shapur's troops dug on those fateful last few days of Dura-Europos' existence as an important city. Beyond the Palmyra gates that once led into the city, we find the Roman legionary headquarters. During the frantic last days of the siege, this building was likely empty and emptied of its contents, with the troops fighting for their very lives and those of the city, or the few who possibly dared try to escape. Not making headway with their external attacks, the Sassanians began to dig underground shaft mines that ran towards and then underneath the fortified city. The Romans themselves dug counter tunnels to stave off the Sassanians and fight them underground. In one of these tunnels, the Romans broke through, only to face Sassanians who ignited a mix of sulfur and pitch that produced what we now know of as sulfur dioxide. Based on archaeological evidence, this killed at least 20 Romans, as their skeletons and traces of the sulfur dioxide have been found. We can be assured of the date of this siege, as a coin dated to the year 256 was found on one of the Romans. Shortly after, the town was infiltrated and captured by Shapur's forces. A new Roman emperor, Valerian, would march against Shapur, recapturing in 257 the city of Antioch and the rest of the province of Syria. Shapur's troops retreated, causing Valerian to pursue them into Edessa, where they would meet for a decisive battle known as the Battle of Edessa. The new emperor Valerian had defeated the usurper Aemilianus and assumed the mantle of emperor for himself. In 254 or 255, he arrived in the eastern provinces to restore order. He was in his 60s when he had begun his fateful march along with his Germanic allies to the Sassanian borders. They would meet the main Persian army in Shapur somewhere between Kaveh and Edessa. We know the Roman side likely numbered 60,000 strong, and that the Sassanian side was at least of equal strength. Predictably, accounts of the battle vary depending on the sources. We know that the two sides met on the battlefield and clashed, likely for hours, wave after wave descending upon each other. After several hours, the Persians, though, would gain the upper hand and continue their relentless assault, with their Savaran knights continuing to climb as the Roman dead began to pile up beneath them. Soon, the dead would number in the thousands. Roman morale clung on, but as they continued to fall under repeated engagements, it would ebb, and it would ebb fast. Soon, the fighting neared Valerian himself and his guard. Encircled with no possibility of retreat, he surrendered to Shapur. The Roman account states that Valerian did retreat back to a fort which was then encircled by Shapur, and seeing no chance for victory or retreat, Valerian sought negotiation with Shapur and was captured during this negotiation. While the former seems the more likely based on Roman and Persian tactics, the latter is included. Shapur sent Valerian and his surviving men to live their lives in Bishapur, and that Shapur used the skilled tradesmen among the Romans for civil engineering projects, including a very large dam project. Projects that helped revitalize the domestic economy. Another account is that Shapur humiliated Valerian and used the former emperor as a stepping stool to mount his horse. When not used in this fashion, this version states he was kept in a cage as a curiosity, and after trying to negotiate ransom, skinned and stuffed with either manure or straw, and kept at a Persian temple as an example of Roman submission. There are also accounts he was treated well, however, and that the allegations of torture were later fabrications by Christian historians of later antiquity. Although disputable, Shapur was said to have built a palace for Valerian. There's been an archaeological find in the region of a palace, but no definitive link made to Valerian. What is certain is that the capture of a Roman emperor by the Persians sent shockwaves throughout the empire, for never had an emperor been thus captured. The fallout from these shockwaves would be temporary fragmentation and revolt within the Roman Empire. Following the Battle of Edessa, Shapur took the city of Caesarea and deported its citizens to the southern provinces of the Sasanian Empire. He then raided Cilicia, where he met stiff Roman resistance from a Roman officer, Ballista, and the Lord of Palmyra, Septimius Odenathus. Shapur retreated back to the Sassanian lands, but not before apparently losing his royal harem to Septimius. Septimius followed Shapur and his forces to the city of Ctesiphon, but there Shapur was able to successfully defend it, and Septimius himself was forced to return to Syria. Shapur had expanded the territory considerably compared to the size of their holdings under his father. The royal court itself was also expanded under his reign, much of it strategically in the form of local kings or governors from his own sons and brothers. The inscriptions mention most of these appointments. An attempt that would, over the following decades and early centuries of the empire, lead to a centralization, something that the Parthians didn't have. The military would also experience a resurgence under Shapur. While the structure was still fundamentally Parthian in terms of aesthetics, and their noble houses who contributed to it, it had been in decline the last 2 centuries under their rule. Under Shapur, however, they employed more cataphracts equipped with the previously mentioned lighter but stronger and more flexible Roman-style chain armor. A chain armor that they themselves would perfect and create superior versions of. They would also over time become more centralized, as mentioned previously, and this would apply to their troops as well. We even have evidence of troop fortifications similar to Roman legionary outposts in terms of their layout, right down to the cross-sectional roads. These fortifications would be found all along the frontier region borders. Lastly, while Zoroastrianism was and would for some time remain the main state religion, with fire temples being built throughout the empire and its vassal states, there was a new religion now buried in the mists of time, but then emerging. All under Shapur's rule. The religion was called Manichaeism after its prophet Mani. Mani was born in Mesopotamia and was considered by the adherents of this faith to be the final prophet after Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus. The religion would thrive not only in the region but elsewhere. The Romans would eradicate it in centuries later, but it would linger as far away as present-day southern China until the 14th century. For a period, it would even become the main rival of Christianity before the spread of Islam began in the 7th century, which eradicated it as well most everywhere except the aforementioned southern China region. However, during Shapur's reign, the religion was not persecuted within the boundaries of his empire. Shapur would die, but not after having put his stamp on the empire, transforming the empire in terms of increased centralization and massive building projects throughout. After his death, there would be a period of instability with many different Shahs taking the reins of power, and we will cover that in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button. If you haven't yet, but you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. Love to have you on board. And as always, until the next video, cheers.